Hello, first class. We're at the Curzon Mayfair, where I believe you used to work. Is that true?
Yes, I used to work here as an usher in I don't know, 7 years ago or something like that. It was kind of the last regular job I had before I managed to switch into, I had like St. Maud in development and another project. But yeah, I worked here with Veronica Tafilska as well, who I co-wrote Love Lies Bleeding with. So we were both here like chatting behind the popcorn machine and stuff. So it's very nice being back.
And what did you learn from your experience working in a cinema?
I guess the brutal reality of how many or few people go to see certain films. Like kind of like being there every day and actually sort of seeing, many screens, sometimes just having like a handful of people in them, which ones have no people turning up, which ones have lots. Yeah, it was quite sobering actually, the reality of ticket sales.
Was there a moment for you when you went from knowing that you wanted to make films and not just watch films?
I've been like messing around with video cameras and stuff and making little films with my friends. So I think the making of them was something I always liked doing, almost as much as the watching. But I think probably when I was a teenager, I think like when the Lord of the Rings films came out, those were the first ones which I sort of started obsessively tracking down the kind of like behind the scenes features and stuff like that, and sort of realising quite how much actually goes, or how much can go into making a film, kind of around then.
And did you have any particularly significant cinema-going experiences in your life? Maybe Lord of the Rings?
Yeah, probably, exactly. I think that was the first, I think I would have been like 12 or 13 when it came out, probably got that wrong. And that was the first film which I went and watched repeatedly and would sort of be like, counting down the days until the next one came out kind of thing, and just being really nerdy about it.
We're here about to do a screening of Love Lies Bleeding, your second feature. It's about to come out in cinemas. And I remember going to see your first film, St. Maud, actually begging tooth and nail to get the last possible ticket when it showed at LFF, because it was the buzziest film of the festival that year when it came out. Was the hype and the buzz around that film and the experience of releasing that film, did that create a pressure when it came time for you to work on your follow-up?
I think if it did, I just tried to ignore it as much as possible. And I think that because the weirdness of St. Maud coming out or not coming out exactly when the pandemic hit, I think kind of swallowed up any kind of, it just so brutally put in perspective like how, I guess, like unimportant and inconsequential your film is or whatever. Or it felt that way anyway, because I was sort of doing all of the kind of press sort of stuff through Zoom in my room. So somehow that probably helped it not feel too real, so I didn't feel too much pressure this time. So I tried to just kind of approach it in a kind of like be bold, have fun, try and not do what you think people might expect you to do next, maybe.
And it is a completely wildly different film, in tone, in setting. Did you know, or did you have something in mind, a direction in mind that you wanted to go in a radically different direction from, say, Maud?
Definitely wanted it to be different, but it's, I think, sort of thematically, like the sort of germ of the ideas probably share. I feel like that it's got quite a bit of crossover with St. Maud, maybe thematically and stuff. People trying to like transform themselves and push themselves to extremes and stuff. And initially, I think the sort of germ of the idea that I then went to Veronica with to co-write was maybe less of a two-hander. I think maybe at first it wasn't a one. It was more of like a one-woman show initially in my head, just following this one woman who's trying to be a bodybuilder and has a kind of unravelling. So in that sense, it had more DNA in common with St. Maud, and then kind of branched out into some bigger, weirder thing. But I definitely knew that tonally I wanted it to be kind of pulpy and melodramatic and funny and sexy and all these kinds of things. And I guess in a way, like, St. Maud ended up kind of being about the horrors of loneliness. So it was fun to then in the next one be kind of like, okay, well then there's the horrors of actually being in a relationship and how badly that can go wrong as well.
And is there, both criminals and love stories, and criminals and love are just such consistent recurrent themes in cinema. Was there any particular films that you were looking at or inspired by when you were working on Love Lies Bleeding?
To be honest, with the whole kind of like criminals in love thing, I was sort of deliberately avoiding watching all of the big obvious famous ones, because you're right, there's so many sort of iconic films, particularly in that kind of era in America. So I sort of deliberately tried to bury my head in the sand a bit and not go and watch stuff like Thelma and Louise and Wild at Heart and stuff like that. But films like that, I guess, cast such a big cultural shadow that even if you try not to think about them, I'm sure they seep in a little bit.
And, you know, you mentioned that there are similarities and similar threads with Saint Maud and Love Lies Beatty, and there certainly are, and one of them is kind of these obsessive characters. You know, Maud in Saint Maud is very obsessive inwardly, but Jackie in particular in Love Lies Beating manifests that obsession externally with the way that she sculpts her body, with the way that she's obsessed with getting to this one competition. Kind of what's attractive to you, what's interesting to you about these characters who are so obsessive?
Maybe it's something to do with there being like a kernel of that obsessiveness, which I think is actually very sort of universally understandable. Even maybe just a lot of people don't quite have the discipline and consistency to actually follow through with stuff. I don't know. I guess it automatically leads you to sort of like wonder where that obsession came from, and so kind of, I don't know, psychologically sort of working backwards, it's quite interesting sort of territory when you're writing stories and characters.
What do you think are those kernels, those little universal, relatable feelings in both Maud?
Probably with like Maud and Jackie, I guess it's a sort of desire to feel powerful and seen and validated and all those kinds of things. I guess they're essentially people who both feel in some way powerless and isolated, wanting to kind of be seen and have some kind of impact and go about it in just quite different ways.
And, you know, in Love Lies Beating, the setting plays a huge role in both the atmosphere of the film, in the kind of characters, both the central characters of Lou and Jackie, but also the coterie of supporting characters who are so extreme and devious and entertaining in equal measure. How important is it for you to find the setting when you're kind of in the writing stages of the film? I
was sort of resistant to the idea of setting in America at first, just because I'm obviously not from America, barely spent any time over there at all, and don't know the country well. So I was like, I feel very unqualified to do this. So I think when me and Veronica first started writing together and sort of fleshing out the story properly, for a little while we were toying with the idea of setting it in Scotland, just to sort of keep it in the UK. And I think even before that, I found some old notes the other day which were talking about setting it in like Soho in London in the 60s. So you sort of like try out different things, and I think the more the story grew, the more it just didn't feel very convincing doing it in the UK. And so as soon as we tried setting it in America, everything just sort of fell into place a lot more. And I think something about like the vastness of that kind of bit of the country where you can have like some weird isolated little town which, you know, you can just go for miles in either direction for hours, and you know, the fact that one of them's stuck in this town, the other one's kind of hitchhiking through it, made that all seem a bit more kind of potent, and made them both seem a bit more kind of isolated. And yeah,
it's funny when you say this, like, oh, how could I write a film about America, because I'm not American, you know, I'm not qualified. Because one of the other interviews that I did for the series was with Wim Wenders, who obviously has done so many incredible films set in America, but being German and kind of has always had this external eye.
Yeah, like Paris, Texas was like one of the sort of, you know, when me and Ben Fordsman were talking about the look of it, that was certainly one of the ones we kept talking about.
Totally, and in a way, it's a country that kind of exists both as its own kind of real place. At the same time, it's an imaginary place that we've created through movies and TV shows.
Yeah, I think well, you know, because I'm English, Vera's Polish, and I think neither of us had spent much time there. But yeah, it's probably the version of America in the film is probably some weird heightened version that's much more influenced by both of us. Yeah, just growing up watching films and TV all the time.
Totally, which I think kind of really gives it this almost surreal, otherworldly feeling as well, in really subtle ways. And can you talk a little bit more about working with Veronica? Why did you want to work with a co-writer this time round, and kind of what did that process look like?
I'd never co-written before, and I mean, Vera's a writer-director as well. Like, she's sort of, you know, doing her own projects. You know, she just directed that Netflix show Baby Reindeer. But we've been friends for years anyway, and we'd sort of always given each other notes on each other's scripts. So I think that's kind of how I justified it. I think I wouldn't necessarily have kind of jumped into just kind of finding someone else I didn't know, because we basically spent like weeks and weeks or months, whatever, just like figuring out the story and mapping it all out on bits of paper. Before, I think I then took this roadmap that we'd done, which had a lot of detail in it already, basically like every little scene, you know, we already had And we did all that together before I then went off and kind of wrote up a first pass, and then I handed it to her and she'd do one and we'd sort of pass it back and forth like that.
Do you find yourself directing actors differently if you have someone like Kirsten versus, you know, someone like Katy who's not as well known to us?
Yes and no. Like I don't think it's to do with whether or not they're like established or whatever. It's just, I think just actors at whatever level often have just slightly different styles. Not in any like, I don't know, it's sort of just like as you're going along you sort of figure out a bit more, okay, such and such responds a bit better to these kinds of notes, or so-and-so wants to go and talk a lot about what's been going on in their past or whatever, whereas other actors want to just be a lot more like practical directions in the moment, what's happening, you know, bigger, faster, slower.
I wonder as well, kind of, Saint Maud is so much of a two-hander between Jennifer Ely and Morfydd Clark's character. And here you've got the central love story, but also this array of extreme supporting characters. Did you, perhaps to kind of change it up from your first film, really wanted to have a bit more of an ensemble piece with this one?
Yes, I mean, I was sort of resistant to it, as in like nervous of doing it, but also thought it would be a good, I sort of wanted to try it. And again, but I think, again, that's probably not something I would have felt comfortable doing if I was writing it by myself. I think a big part of particularly the sort of ensemble-ness of it, more dialogue scenes, more characters, like family stuff, I think definitely I enjoyed and felt more confident doing because me and Vera were doing it together, because I guess it's just more things to keep in your head. So Saint Maud, it's kind of, okay, there's usually just one person to worry about on screen, maybe two, one location. And directing wise, like, you know, first film, much smaller budget, it just logistically makes a lot more sense. So yes, it was interesting it was good to try. Definitely there were some days where I think early on at one point I was like, do you know what, I don't think I've ever directed a scene with more than 4 people talking in it or something like that. So, oh shit, or kind of like 4 people talking around a table, which shouldn't be particularly complicated, but I just had some stuff like that I just hadn't really done before. There are a lot more set pieces and moving parts in this one.
And tell me, you know, we spoke a little bit about the America of it all, the American setting, but can you tell me about building the world of a past that is close enough, though we have images of it, we have even maybe memories of it, even if it's like we're both very young, barely out of high school, so maybe like distant childhood memories of what the late 80s might look like. But did you always know that you wanted to set it in 89, in kind of in that particular space?
We sort of wanted it to have a bit more of a 90s sensibility, because I guess the film's a bit kind of, I don't know, sort of like a bit grungy and cynical or whatever, but I guess with all the muscles and guns and Jackie's character in particular, the kind of like American dream, follow your heart, do what you want to do, bigger, bigger, more, felt appropriate.
This film really accidentally dialed into a very specific niche obsession I have, which is muscle culture from the 80s in America.
Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, this is the film for you then.
Completely. A big fan of Pumping Iron 2, The Women, as well as the first one. One of the big revelations of the film is obviously Katy O'Brian, who plays Jackie. Can you tell me a little bit how you found her, and kind of did her casting impact the character in any way? Did her own experiences with the world of bodybuilding make their way into the movie? I
mean, we cast her so close to the shoot that it all kind of, you know, she basically had to kind of just dive into what we had sort of planned. But I think, I don't know, there were lots of little details along the way where, you know, if we were sort of shooting a scene where she was meant to be eating something, she could kind of like tell her what she shouldn't be eating. And when it came to do like actually film the bodybuilding show, you know, she had that experience of having done it before, that, you know, again, time is short, we were rehearsing it, but she really knew what she was doing, I guess. Actually, and that was quite cool because she was doing her lineup and stuff with all of these professional bodybuilders who'd come in to be in that sequence. And so seeing her kind of like trading tips and stuff with those guys was really cool. I guess it also means she just has a real kind of like appreciation and love for that sort of sport as like an art form, and knew that kind of world. I wanted to ask you, kind of, do you remember if any kind of particularly memorable or impactful recent trips to the cinema? When I was in Sundance, which is where we had our premiere, I saw this documentary, Eno, about Brian Eno. Mm-hmm. And that was just fascinating because it was like the first time in a while I've just seen something which is just, I don't know, just made in a very unique kind of way. And, you know, He's an incredible, fascinating artist anyway, who I'd just happily watch like just a straight documentary about. They basically made a program so that every time the film gets shown, or it sort of gets automatically re-edited. And it's in the way that like a lot of Brian Eno's music, he does this like sort of self-generating or regenerating kind of music that, you know, just carries on loops and keeps kind of shifting. This film, they basically, I think they edited it all into these different kind of segments. But it basically means that every time they show that film, whoever's in the audience, then they're the only people who'll ever watch exactly that version of the film. So even within, so I think I saw like the second screening, which was, so that was completely different order and contained a bunch of different scenes to the people who'd seen it the day before.
What do you think is the best seat to be in a cinema?
Someone once told me that you always have to be like off to the left a little bit, so I kind of sometimes do that just because a friend told me once ages ago. I usually like, I'm just not too close to too many other people. It's kind of like to sit somewhere where you can loudly like munch popcorn without like sort of pissing off whoever's next to you.
You're a popcorn person.
Antisocial cinema goer. I'll sit in the back hiding somewhere.
Thank you so much.
Ooh, thank you very much. This was great.
It was wonderful.